USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Thursday, March 7th, 2024. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 to get your tickets today. Entering playoffs this weekend is the Big Ten, but the team that finished first has the weekend off, and we're going to talk a little bit about Michigan State and the Big Ten.
We'll call him the writer emeritus, and let's just call him one of the greatest writers ever in college hockey. Used to write for MSUSpartans.com and is still around doing a lot of stuff these days. One of our great friends and one of the best guys in college hockey, Neil Koepke. Welcome back. Sparty, we had you on in October and you were saying Sparty was pretty good. And now Sparty has won the Big Ten regular season title. I'm sure that's something they're taking a lot of pride in. You saw it before the season started. What did you see from the season, Neil?
Well, I didn't really think they'd be this good, guys. I really thought they would be an NCAA contender and maybe a top three finisher behind maybe Minnesota and Michigan. I didn't think Wisconsin would be there either. So, but what they did as a team and what Coach Ed Miguel has done is just bringing together the program and the team to the point where they compete every night. They've got good skill. They've got sort of all-stars in goal and on defense, and a lot of guys up front that don't get a lot of attention because there's no one or two scorers that just stand out. But it's a lot of good three-line players with a fourth line that forechecks the heck out of everybody, and they create chances and score goals, and they're part of the whole process here. But yeah, it's been a fine season. First time, guys, that Michigan State has won a regular season title in any league, CCHA or Big Ten, since 2001, when Ron Mason was the coach in his second last year at the helm of the Spartans.
I look at this team, and by the way, that's pretty amazing because they had some pretty good teams in between there that never won regular season titles. But I look at what Adam Nightingale has done, and for some reason, I was just going back and looking at the history, and I felt like this was year 3 or year 4 for him, and it's year 2. He came in with a plan, and I guess that is probably the key to how he's developed this team. But do you even think for him, maybe this roadmap that he had to success is even faster than he could have imagined?
Yeah, I think so. He had no idea really what was going to happen in terms of the second season with 10 freshmen and 5 transfers. He was hoping they would, get together and become a pretty good quality team, and you'd have good moments there. They all joined the team except for one player in July. July 1st, they took classes, were on campus, so they got to know each other. They got to skate together, obviously not under the coach's supervision. And then when September came, they all went together, and basically he had a group that was really close, and freshmen and transfers that really fit in well. 3 of the transfers are among their top scorers, and basically one of the freshmen is going to be a first-round NHL draft pick, probably 1 to 5 or so, in Artem Levshnov, the defenseman from Belarus. So there were things that went together, and they really put together a strong start. Then in the second half, that's when everybody gets better around the league. So there were some splits there, but probably the biggest thing that they did was beat Michigan 3 times out of 4. Despite the fact, guys, that in the first game at Munn Arena between the two teams, they lost 7-1 or 7-2, I think. They got a late goal, yeah. And then they went to Ann Arbor the next night and were down 4-1 in the second period, being outshot about 30-10. And then all of a sudden, bing, 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 tied it up, took the lead and won 7-5. And from that point on, I thought that was like a turning point where they start to believe. And they ended up beating Michigan 2 more times that season, once in Yost Arena again, and another time at Little Caesars before 19,000 fans in a great game in the middle of February. So a lot of little things, but and they were able to win a game on the road against Wisconsin in front of 15,000 fans to clinch the title last Friday night at the Kohl Center.
I want to kind of ask you about some of the players, Neil. And the guy that stands out to me, 15 goals in 34 games, Joey Larson, and what he's done in his second season at Michigan State. How dynamic has he been for this offense?
Well, he's been really good, and he was off to a good start. He hasn't scored probably in about 6 games now. But Joey is a transfer from Northern Michigan, where he did put up some goals last year. He just wanted to play at a higher level, and he wasn't drafted. So he thought if he came to Michigan State and got more attention, he'd be better off in the future for his free agency status. And he's done that, basically. I think he's coming back next year because he's not overwhelmingly great and good. I think he needs another year. He's only probably 19 or 20. But Larson's been good. And, the 2 other guys that have really been dominant on this team are the goaltender, Trey Augustine, who was the youngest goalie in college hockey at 18 years old and drafted by the Red Wings in the 2nd round last year. So he's really been a factor. He's probably the team's MVP. And then again, he probably won't be on the first or second all Big Ten teams because of his goals against average and save percentage isn't as good as, say, Kyle McClellan of Wisconsin, Ryan Bischel of Notre Dame, and Justin Close of Minnesota. But he's still been the key. He's made several times 40 saves in a game to keep the Spartans in the game. And then the other guy is Artem Leshnov, the defenseman, who going into last weekend was a plus 27 and one of the top scoring defensemen in college hockey. And he actually leads Michigan State in scoring right now after a goal and an assist over the weekend. So those 2 guys have really been positive, and along with Larson's 15 goals and so forth. But there are like 5 guys on the team with 10 or more goals, and you just never know, guys, who's going to score the goal in the first goal of the game or whatever, or the winning goal. And last week in Minnesota, last weekend, Reed Lebster scored the winning goal with 7 minutes left. And he is the transfer, 5th-year grad from where? University of Massachusetts. Even though at one time, guys, he was committed to Michigan State. And then for some reason decommitted, went to UMass, and he played for assistant coach for Michigan State, Jared DeMichael. So he knew DeMichael coming in, and he said, you know what? I'm from Grand Rapids. Half my family goes to Michigan State, or has. He's got a cousin, I think, on the soccer team or whatever. And so he came in, and he's been the 3rd-line guy, basically, but a good player and a good role model for these guys. And he's probably the oldest Spartan, along with Nash Nienhaus, at about 24, 25 years old.
I want to ask you about believability in this team and what it looks like inside the locker room. I know you're around these guys a lot. Do you feel like there's a lot of believability? I know when you can get a first-time team into a position of maybe some dominance and winning a conference championship, one of the hardest things now is going to the postseason where you might have one game and you're done. Do you feel like there's some extra believability right now?
Yeah, I do. I think that the team bonded well together. They're really close. Like I say, it's not a team that has a lot of great scores, a lot of good scores. And then, on defense, they're better. It probably still is their weakness is basically defending at times and taking too many penalties. They lead the Big Ten in penalties. And we're always sort of joking in the press box, who in the last 5 minutes is going to take a penalty and cause us to have a nail biter of a hockey game. But the believability is there. And one of the things, like Trey Augustine has been on the World Junior team for the last 2 years and played in some big games, won a gold medal. And so he's really, really got the confidence that he can play in big games and not get rattled. He's very calm. He's not a wordsmith. He doesn't, after games, talk in wild sentences and talk colorful stuff. He basically is, I played well. I thought I was seeing the puck well, and we got some breaks, and that's it. And he goes on, and he goes. So it's short sentences. But Augustine is one of those guys that has been in big games, played for the U.S. team for 2 years or so. And the other guys, too, seem to have like that experience that like Maxim Sturbeck, one of the freshman defensemen from Slovakia. He's played in 2 World Juniors, and he's got another 1 or 2 left. So he basically has been in those type of games too. So they don't seem to wilt. They don't seem to get taken away by the seriousness of the situation. And it'll be still tested again because obviously they play a semifinal game, and now it's one and done in the Big Ten tournament. Won't play till a week from Saturday. And then if they win that, they'll play the championship game also at home because of the first place finish. So I would say, yes, they're not, I wouldn't say they call them a great team. I'm not sure there's a great team in college hockey. Maybe from what I'm seeing, and you guys have seen Boston College, maybe you could say that is pretty of a dominant team. But I don't think the Spartans are great. And they could end up losing to Michigan or whatever in the playoffs, but they're still in the NCAA tournament. And we'll see how they get. Now, the next 2 games will decide whether they're a number 4 seed, 5, 6, or whatever. So they would love to obviously get the number 1 seed, a number 1 seed, and get sent to St. Louis or so, and have a little better of a first game, and then go for it in the title game. But yeah, I'm thinking they're ready. But again, they're not what I would call just a dominant team like we've seen in the past in some NCAA tournaments. But then again, guys, Michigan was a dominant team for a couple of years, winning the title in the playoffs, not so much in the regular season. Because one of the great trivia questions now is just name the one team in the Big Ten that's never finished in first place. And one of those teams used to be Michigan State, but guess what? The only team that hasn't is Michigan. Ohio State, Penn State, everybody's Notre Dame has finished first, but the Wolverines only seem to win playoff titles like they have the last 2 years against Minnesota at Minnesota. So again, yeah, I think the Spartans are ready, but again, I don't think necessarily they're a lock. If they play Michigan at home in a week or so, if Michigan gets by Notre Dame, then I think you're going to see almost a pick'em game with the Spartans a slight favorite because of the home ice advantage, but nothing would surprise me with the top 4 teams in this league right now.
More with Neil Koepke in a moment. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Where are my hockey fans at? Present! Welcome to Fandom 101. It's NCAA Ice Hockey Championship time, when the hottest teams in the country face off under one roof. Be there to see your squad hoist the ultimate trophy overhead. The NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th in St. Paul, Minnesota. Attendance is encouraged. Passion is mandatory. Buy your seats today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Class dismissed.
We're back with veteran hockey writer Neil Koepke. Neil, let's talk a little bit about the rest of the Big Ten. You mentioned Wisconsin. Now, Mike Hastings has never had a losing season at any level that he's coached at. And a lot of folks thought maybe this would be the first year for that, and that it might take 2 or 3 years for the Badgers to get up to the top of the league. Here they are, right in there, right to the last weekend, fighting for the top. Probably you could say the same thing about them. No big, huge stars, not a dominant team, but they've had a successful season. So what's your take on the Badgers?
The Badgers are really good. They're good. They're like a cohesive team, and Mike Hastings has brought in structure. I mean, I'm more shocked at Wisconsin going from 7th to 2nd and having a chance at winning it all for first place in the last week in the season. But they're like Michigan State in a way. They've had great goaltending from McClellan. It's surprisingly, he's a grad transfer from what I think Mercyhurst, and didn't play that great last year, according to the Wisconsin media types that I know. But this year he's been dominant. 7 shutouts, and they've got some guys that really have turned the corner and brought in 3 from last year's team, and brought in 3 transfers with Mike Hastings from Minnesota State. And I think he won freshman. So they're pretty good. They're better defensively than they have been in years. And yet I don't see them as really like a favorite. The team that I would say that is most dangerous to me right now in the Big Ten is Minnesota. They're sort of laying in the woods there because they really had some, I would say struggles, but just early in the season, lost some games, tied some games, got behind Michigan State and Wisconsin in the points race, but they got two good lines, and the first line with Pitlick and Snuggerud and freshman Moore. That is a very great line, and even the second line with Jackson Nelson. They scare us more than I would say any other team in the Big Ten right now. And I would say if everybody holds court and Penn State doesn't upset Minnesota and Ohio State doesn't upset Wisconsin, you're going to have an Ohio State-Minnesota rematch at the Kohl Center a week from Sunday. So that to me I would favor Minnesota just the way they're playing right now. And yet McClellan would have to be great. That's going to be a good atmosphere because I think they'll probably sell it out in Madison. But Wisconsin, give them credit. It went down to the last weekend, and the same for Coach of the Year. It's either Hastings or Nightingale. And I think now with the win with the Spartans, Nightingale will get it. But Hastings has really done a great job there in one season, whereas Nightingale is in his second season. But kudos to the Badgers because that was a pretty good team. And they really got on a roll even after losing some games to Michigan State. I think Lindenwood they lost. And then they won 10 straight. And they finally in the second half came down to reality a little bit with some splits and getting swept by some teams. But they're still good. And I understand why they're in the pairwise at number 4, 5, or 6 or whatever. And they're probably going to beat Ohio State, just like they did in the regular season up until the last weekend, of course, when they lost in overtime and they lost to Ohio State to give the Spartans a little bit of a break there. So I would say Wisconsin good, Minnesota really on the mode right now to be an NCAA contender for sure.
Michigan is finding itself right on the edge of whether they'll make it in the tournament. Certainly, if they do well in the Big Ten tournament, that'll help them. Last year, Brandon Naurato did a terrific job by taking over the team very late in the summer. Maybe a little bit of rebuilding. Has Michigan taken a big step back from last year, or is it just that everybody in the league has stepped up their game?
No, I think they've taken a step back a little bit. They lost a lot of good players. There's no question. And they still have two lines that are very, very good and dangerous. And their power play, I think, is still at 37%. So you don't want to take penalties against them. But they've been erratic. One time they looked like the best team in the league. The next time they looked like they're not going to win a game the rest of the season. And I think maybe the story of the season might be reflected in last Saturday's game where they'd already clinched, third place. And they were not going, or fourth place. They were not going to get to Minnesota because they lost 6-2. Then on the second night, they built up a 3-0 lead. Then it was 3-1. Then it was 4-1 over Minnesota, at Minnesota. And all of a sudden, the Gophers came back and tied it. Michigan went ahead 5-4. Gophers tied it again when the last minute and a half with the goalie pulled. And then in overtime on a power play, Seamus Casey scored, and that gave him the 6-5 victory. And yet, it was like, wow, we almost got swept here in giving up a big lead. And they basically lost 3-4 to Michigan State. They lost the season series against Wisconsin and the season series against Minnesota. They won the season series against Notre Dame and Ohio State and Penn State. But they just were erratic and basically inconsistent. And yet McGroarty is going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year, I suspect. And his running mate, line mate, Brindley is very good. He'll be on the first team. Frank Nazar will probably be on the second team. And Seamus Casey will be the first team, one of the first team defensemen. And so they've got the players. They just haven't been in sync most of the season. And we'll see now with the tournament coming up just how they do in the playoffs. And like you say, if they would lose to Notre Dame, they're probably out of the NCAA tournament. They're probably back to 15, 16 or whatever, and probably not going to get in. But so this is a big series for them again. 2 weeks ago, they beat Notre Dame at Yost 4-0 and 2-1. So Notre Dame had problems scoring goals. And for once, Michigan just had a good time not giving up a lot of goals with another shutout and a 1-goal game. So again, Michigan is a team to watch. I think that's the only series in the Big Ten playoffs this coming week that basically can go one way or the other. And when you're playing against Jeff Jackson, you just never know. I believe going into that last series with Notre Dame and Michigan 2 weeks ago, Notre Dame had won 7 of the last 8 games at Yost Arena. And yet that's why we all thought that maybe Notre Dame could win that series and then pull away and finish 4th and host Michigan instead of going on the road. But that wasn't the case. Michigan played a very good game. Notre Dame couldn't score. So now we're at a rematch situation. But I wouldn't count Notre Dame out just yet because they're still the good defensive team, opportunistic. They've got a good goaltender, one of the best, and they've also got a structure that if they get the lead fast early, I think they can pull an upset there. But again, overall, with Michigan's goal scoring power and power play, I would give the edge to Michigan, but we'll see because you never know just how they're going to play week to week.
Yeah, Notre Dame with Ryan Bischel, one of the 4 Richter semifinalists coming from the Big Ten, and really the veteran who has been terrific in net so many years for the Fighting Irish. Among them, I guess Notre Dame really has the best chance at an upset. What about Penn State and what about Ohio State that has already shown that it can handle the Badgers?
Yeah, that was a surprise 2-3 weeks ago, whatever, in Columbus, where the Badgers went in there and they went in there, lost 2. They did get a point, so they kept a little bit close. And then they went into Penn State, which is a place the Badgers don't really play well, and they swept. They did a good job there. But I think Ohio State, is just playing for just fun. They know they could beat the Badgers, but now it's in the Kohl Center, and the Badgers have something to play for here. They're already in the tournament, so there's no pressure there. But they want to get back and see what they can do, and maybe a rematch with Michigan State, obviously. But Ohio State is another team that is probably underachieving just because of the fact that they've got some decent scores. They're speedy. And once they get the goaltending situation settled, they basically are split. They basically made some inroads in the last part of the season, but still they're an overwhelming underdog, I think, in that series. And with Penn State, you never know either because they don't have the big scores, but at times they do come through with the goal scoring prowess and the attack that they do, always throwing pucks at the net and trying to play offense like they did. But they don't have those big time scores. And obviously they do have a freshman, Aiden Fink, who's very good, and senior Ryan Kerwin, very good too. Goaltending is pretty inconsistent. It's not one of their strengths, and even is their defense, which is basically one of their strengths when they were in the top 3 in the years past. 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, they played at Minnesota and got shut out twice. So here we go again. Can the Nittany Lions score a goal and keep it close? And the way the Gophers are playing, I think that's going to be tough because the Gophers, like Michigan, have that great offense, and you put them on the power play, and they're going to do damage for you. And they've got the good goaltender too. Close is very probably underrated because some of the other goalies in the Big Ten, but he still is one of the best. And their defense, even though they've got 4 freshmen on D, they have come a long way from October, November. And the last time the Spartans played them, Adam Nightingale was even commenting on how good those defensemen have come, those freshmen, and the other guys that are basically back there as juniors and sophomores. So it's a good defense too, but they're basically an offensive gunner type team. And yet with the goalie and offense, they stay in games and they can overwhelm you sometimes. So that would be a decent series to see if Penn State can bring it up a little level offensively and put some pressure on Minnesota. But I think, again, Minnesota is an overwhelming favorite to win that series.
Before I let you go, Neil, and maybe you just tipped your hat to this a little bit. If I had to force you to pick one upset this weekend, which series do you think we could see an upset in the best of 3?
For sure, it'd be Notre Dame over Michigan. As we all know, Notre Dame knows how to win under Jeff Jackson. They may not be the most prolific scoring team, and they play a little bit of a trap, a little bit of a stay-at-home defense. And when you make a mistake, they spring the opportunistic team that they are. So that would be the one. I think Notre Dame can beat Michigan. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but I think that's the one where you could see Notre Dame staying alive and then coming to Michigan State for another series there after the Spartans split with them the last time they played at Notre Dame.
Would it have to be 2-1 lost 7-5, 2-1 wins for Notre Dame.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, 2-1, 3-2. I mean, if Notre Dame can score 3 goals, they got a good chance. But if they can score 1 against a team like Michigan, you better not hold that like in a positive. You got to score 2 or 3, and then you got to just hold off that power, stay out of the penalty box, and also just every time McGroarty and Brunley and Neza are on the ice, just hold your breath, and hopefully they don't get around the net, because they're a scoring machine. They're not as great scoring as the team from 2 years ago when he had all those NHL draft picks, first round draft picks, but they've got enough potential scorers that they can. And Shamus Casey, the defenseman, has led the league in scoring by defensemen with Leshnoff most of the season. At one time, he was the leading scorer in the Big Ten. Now he's more of a defensive guy, and he's a setup guy, but and the other guys have like taken over the offensive reins. Michigan for most of the season has had the top 6 scorers in the Big Ten every week. And yet they were lucky to finish 500. I mean, if they would have lost on Saturday night in that wild game at Minnesota, they would have been 1-2 games below 500. And yet that pulled them to 500 in the league. Overall, they basically were over 500 by about 5 games. But then again, 2 of those games were against Lindenwood, and 2 of the games were against another starting team. What was it be? The one in Boston.
Stonehill.
Yeah. And each series of those games, they scored 18 goals in each series. 38 goals of their goals this year had been from those 4 games. So really, I sometimes wonder with the pairwise how they're really ranked so high with those teams on their record. Now, yes, they played at St. Cloud, they played at UMass, and so they've had a split at UMass and a win and a tie at St. Cloud. So they played some good teams, and they played Providence too to a split. So those are good teams to play against. But the other four games, they just mauled. One was like 9-2 and 10-1 or so. But again, they've got the scoring power. Can they get the defense? And that matchup will be fun to watch, just because of the fact that Notre Dame is so good at shutting down a team. Whether they can do it this time, we'll see.
Well, you get a somewhat weekend off here as Sparty is idle, but I'm sure you will be watching a lot of televised hockey. If you're not trying to find a barn to go to, I'm sure you would probably try to do that too. But Neil Koepke, the dean of all hockey writers in the United States, we appreciate you joining the show today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Will we see you in St. Paul? I guess that's our big question. We don't know the answer to that.
Yes, you will. I'm making my return this year.
That is the best news we've heard all day.
I went to Madison last weekend, had a great time as on my own, and I'm going to this Frozen Four just because Minnesota. And if you guys are having a show again at
we'll be at Tom Reed's.
At Tom Reed's, I'll be there with you after all the practice and stuff. That'll be fun.
That's our good friend Neil Koepke. Jim, Adam Nightingale has really seen things turn around under his leadership in a very quick way, all the way to first place in the regular season for Michigan State for the first time in decades. And it's brought a lot of attention to the program, too. The Spartans are very well thought of as a place for player development. There's an article in the latest hockey news. They get all kinds of TV and media attention there in East Lansing. What a change in such a short time.
It really is. And I honestly said that to Neil, that I had to go back and see how many years Adam Nightingale had been there, because it felt like 3 or 4. It's only been not even a full 2 years. So impressive what he's been able to do. But you kind of highlighted it too, Ed. Like, this changes everything. And timing's good too, right? That Mon Arena gets its renovation just finished. One of the now elite hockey arenas again in college hockey. Always was one of the best back in the 80s and 90s. You always thought about that. And I think at the regionals I went to, and with teams that participated in the regionals out there, it was always first class. But it got old, and I got back there in the early 2010s, I guess, and it looked old, and it needed an upgrade. And then you go, into the locker room, the weight facilities, all that stuff that players really look at, that has improved as well. And I think Adam Nightingale did a fantastic job taking that across the finish line and making sure that building was ready to be the best it could be, as this team is one of the best teams they've seen on campus. Probably, I don't want to take anything away from Rick Conley. You won a national championship, but you haven't had a league champion since the days of Ron Mason, which is crazy. But I do look at this year's Michigan State team as one that's very special, and I'll be interested to watch them along the way. You do have to go through the whole thing that we talk about all the time, Ed, and it's teams that haven't been there. How do they perform the first time they are on the big stage? And they've been on a big stage all year. You're in the Big Ten as a tough league. I get it. But now you have to win in these one and done scenarios. This is going to be the toughest test the Spartans face. I'll be interested to watch from afar. But as Neil puts it, they seem ready for prime time.
It's funny, and we can leave off with this. When Neil talked about the team having no real standout player, but 3 good lines, and then also having great goaltending, it made me think about a team that won the national championship in 2007 that kind of fit that same description.
It's understandable that you don't always have to have that standout line. And I cover Boston College a lot, and right now they have 2 standout lines, an entire freshman line, and then you can throw in another player in there, and another 3 players in there. When you really come to it, you end up with 2 of the best lines in college hockey. But right now you don't necessarily need that. And that's what a lot of teams have based their success on. I think of Yale, I think of Union, I think of Providence, and teams that were darn good, but nobody thought were phenomenal. And they all found a way to win national championships, despite the fact that nobody gave them a lot of credit. Nobody's going to give Michigan State a lot of credit. They're going to say, they're too young. They've never been there before. But if they go on a run, and Adam Nightingale's a winning coach, you get a winner in there as a coach, you don't get panicked inside those big game experiences. You never know how far a team like that can go.
This podcast has been sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 to get your tickets today. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Spotlight.